So last time we looked at price elasticity of demand, but I told you earlier that price elasticity of demand isn't the only elasticity that there is. There are lots of elasticities, because all elasticity shows is the responsiveness of demand or supply to something that affects it. So we've looked at price, but there are lots of other things that could affect either demand or supply. And we'll start with demand. We'll start with a couple of other factors that might affect demand. And two of the big ones so if we look at other elasticities, two of the big ones are one, income, and two, the prices of other goods and services. So things that are linked to this one. So that says other. So at this stage, it's very important that you understand really clearly what the sign, the plus or minus on an elasticity means. So price elasticity demand, remember, we said generally price elasticity demand is negative. And negative doesn't mean that demand's going to fall. Remember, it means that there is an inverse or negative correlation. All the negative sign means is if there is an increase in A, that leads to a decrease in B, or if there is a decrease in A, that leads to an increase in B. They go in opposite directions. And that's simply because demand lines, there's price, there's quantity demand, and we know they slope downwards like that. So if price was to go up, then demand would go down, or if price was to go down, then demand would go up. So elastic or inelastic, it doesn't depend on the sign, it depends on the size of the change. So, as I'm saying, all elasticities are negative. Minus 0.5 is inelastic, because we said it changes by 0.5, demand changes by 0.5 times as much as price. Minus 2 is elastic, because demand changes by 2 times as much as price. And all the minus says is it goes in the opposite direction. So I think before we move on to the actual elasticities themselves, just be really, really clear that if an elasticity, let's come up with 5 different elasticities there. I always do this. Run out of space. Minus 2, minus 0.5, 0, plus 0.5, plus 2. And let's suppose that there is a change in a causal factor. And a causal factor is just something like price or income or advertising or how hot it is outside, or it could be anything. And let's suppose that causal factor rises, falls by 10%. Then what does the negative elasticity tell us is going to happen to demand? In this case, demand would rise by 20%, 2 times as much, and in the opposite direction. Here, demand would rise by 5%. The opposite direction, the sign is minus, and half as much. Here, there would be no change. Here, demand in this case would fall by 5%, because here we have a positive correlation, and a positive correlation means that the two things rise and fall together. So a positive correlation means that an increase in A leads to an increase in B, or a decrease in A leads to a decrease in B. So that wouldn't be the case for price, but it would probably be the case for income. Often, if income was to rise, demand would rise, or if income was to fall, demand would fall. So here, if the causal factor falls by 10%, it's a positive correlation, so demand would fall by 0.5 times as much in the same direction. And likewise here, if the causal factor falls by 10% and the elasticity is plus 2, it changes by 2 times as much and in the same direction. So be really clear that all a minus elasticity means, a negative elasticity, let's suppose we were talking about just PD. A negative elasticity means that an increase in price leads to a decrease in demand, and a decrease in price leads to an increase in demand. If for some reason price elasticity demand was positive, which is not very likely, but it could be, an increase in price would lead to an increase in demand, and a decrease in price would lead to a decrease in demand. And that doesn't tell you whether things are elastic or inelastic, it just tells you about the link between them, about how one thing affects the other. Whether it's elastic or inelastic depends on the size of the reaction. Is it more than proportional, so the elasticity is more than 1, or is it less than proportional and the elasticity is 0 to 1? Yeah, so elastic, elasticity is 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Inelastic, elasticity is 0.1, 0.2, 0.4, something like that. Yeah, so that's the key thing to understand before we get into the detail.